You can usually tell which world someone's nervous system grew up in by how they react to silence. For some people, silence feels normal. It feels like space. For others, silence feels incomplete, like something is missing and should be filled. The same thing happens with waiting, boredom, and being unreachable. One person experiences it as relief. Another experiences it as discomfort. And it's not because one is stronger or weaker. It's because their brain learned different rules about what normal life feels like. The analog generation didn't just live without constant technology. They lived with a slower feedback loop. If you wanted an answer, you had to search, ask, or wait. If you wanted to connect, you had to plan. If you were bored, you stayed bored until something changed. Over time, that shapes a specific internal rhythm. Research shows that the brain adapts to repeated environments, and when stimulation is lower and less predictable, attention and emotion regulation develop around patience and internal coping. You learn to manage time from the inside, not from external pings. The digital generation didn't just grow up with devices. They grew up with constant cues. Answers are immediate. Social feedback is visible. Connection is always possible. That creates a different psychological baseline. Studies suggest that when attention is frequently interrupted, the brain becomes more alert to new information and more likely to scan for it, even when there's no real need. Stimulation becomes the background setting. It doesn't feel like extra. It feels like the default climate your mind expects. This difference shows up in focus. The analog mind often learned deep attention in longer stretches because the environment allowed it. You could stay with a thought without being pulled away every few minutes. The digital mind often learned rapid switching because the environment demanded it. You get good at toggling, but the cost is that toggling can become a habit you carry into quiet moments. Recent research suggests that frequent task switching increases mental fatigue and reduces the feeling of cognitive clarity. So even when someone is productive, they can feel scattered afterward, as if their mind has been running in too many directions at once. It also shapes how each generation experiences boredom. In an analog environment, boredom was common and not always treated as a problem. It could turn into imagination, daydreaming, or simply doing nothing. Psychological studies indicate that boredom can serve as a signal that pushes the mind toward creativity and internal exploration when external stimulation is limited. In a digital environment, boredom is often instantly solved. There is always something to scroll, watch, or check. The brain learns that discomfort should be removed quickly. That can make boredom feel sharper when it finally arrives, because the nervous system isn't used to staying with it. Social behavior changes too, but not just in obvious ways. The analog generation often learned that relationships happen through shared time, shared context, and slower trust building. You know people because you see them, not because you track them. The digital generation often learns relationships through constant access. People are present even when they're not physically there. Researchers have found that constant, partial connection can create a sense of being socially on for longer periods, even when you're alone. That can increase emotional load. It can also increase sensitivity to social signals because you're constantly receiving them. This is where emotional regulation starts to diverge. The analog nervous system often learned regulation through containment, distraction through real-world tasks, and private processing. It might not have had as much emotional language, but it had more forced space. The digital nervous system often learns regulation through immediate soothing, immediate validation, and rapid emotional expression. It may have more language, but less uninterrupted quiet. Research shows that both styles have strengths and costs. Containment can become suppression, expression can become overstimulation, and neither is a character flaw. They're adaptations. The analog generation often carries a different relationship with privacy. Privacy wasn't a strategy. It was normal life. You could disappear for a day and it didn't automatically mean something was wrong. The digital generation often grows up with visibility as a social norm. Being unreachable can read as avoidance. Not posting can read as absence. Studies suggest that when visibility becomes a social standard, people can experience low-level pressure to perform stability, happiness, or productivity, even when no one explicitly demands it. That pressure can quietly shape self-image, because your sense of self becomes linked to how you appear, not only how you feel. This is one reason the two generations can misunderstand each other. The analog generation can look at digital habits and see dependence, distraction, or fragility. The digital generation can look at analog habits and see emotional distance, avoidance, or disconnection. But what's often happening is a difference in mental safety patterns. One mind feels safe with space. The other mind feels safe with access. One mind sees quiet as peace. The other mind sees quiet as uncertain. Internal consequences show up in small daily ways. The analog mind may feel overwhelmed by constant alerts because it reads them as demands, not background noise. The digital mind may feel restless without input because the body is used to a steady stream of stimulation. The analog mind may default to solving problems privately, then sharing later. The digital mind may default to processing in real time, seeking feedback to stabilize the emotion. Research shows that both patterns can drain energy when they're forced to operate in the other generation's world, because the brain has to translate its own instincts. Over time, this becomes more than preference. It becomes identity. The analog generation may take pride in self-reliance and endurance, sometimes without noticing that it can also create loneliness. The digital generation may take pride in openness and awareness, sometimes without noticing that it can also create chronic self-monitoring. Psychological studies indicate that when people constantly track their thoughts, emotions, and outcomes, they can become more insightful, but also more mentally tired. The mind never fully powers down because it's always evaluating. The calmer reframe is that neither generation is broken. They're tuned differently. One was tuned for a world where time moved slower, where feedback was delayed, and where disconnection was normal. The other was tuned for a world where feedback is immediate, where visibility is constant, and where disconnection can feel like disappearance. And when you see it as nervous system training rather than a personality flaw, it becomes easier to understand why both sides feel misunderstood. They're not just arguing about habits, they're defending what their brain learned was safe. If this felt familiar, you can like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who's noticed the same divide.